Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Luke Evans and I'm here to talk to you today about egoism. Now there are a lot of videos out there about egoism and I'm not going to go very much in depth with this, but the reason I wanted to go over this video or create this video for egoism is twofold. First of all, I know I'm going to be referencing egoism a lot. I talk about it all the time, especially once we get into capitalism and politics and things like that. And second of all, there are a lot of people who have videos of egoism who either get it completely wrong or they're talking about some of the more outdated theories of egoism or some of the less rational interpretations of egoism. So if you want a more in-depth video, I highly suggest going to the Ayn Rand Institute. They have a YouTube channel. If you like reading anything by Ayn Rand, she has The Virtue of Selfishness and a few other books that really breaks down all of the virtues within egoism, and it's fantastic but very dense reading. But if you want a full explanation, one of those two sources is great. If you go anywhere else, especially on YouTube, and watch another video, I caution you about their interpretations. If I could skip this video, I would, but there are so many videos out there about egoism that just break it down horribly, misinterpret it, or they'll actually be referencing another theory, something like subjectivism, rather than egoism. So I'm going to go over a really quick description of egoism, but then I'm going to bounce it off of all of the other philosophies, or at least the relevant ones, just because I think you can get a better understanding about a theory by understanding what it is not and comparing it to others. Hopefully you're a rational being and you can figure out a lot of rationality behind egoism, because it is called the rational egoist, or at least the rational self-interest is what we are shooting for. So, as I mentioned earlier, egoism is created by Ayn Rand. That's why I was referencing the Ayn Rand Institute. And it is the ethical structure within her philosophy of egoism. So some of my other videos, which I'll reference or I'll link in the comments or whatever people do, her philosophy of objectivism has 5 parts. You have the metaphysics, that's where the objectivist things objectively exist. You have the epistemology of acknowledging that we can understand it by our rational minds. And then you have the egoism, the saying, if those things are true, then our rational capabilities would lead us to live a certain way. And the certain way is reaching our personal max potential, and that is dictated by our hardwiring. We exist in a certain way as humans, and we're wanting to live in what she calls qua-human, Q-U-A. I have no idea why that word, I haven't heard anyone else use that word, but that's the word she uses. So if we're going to live as a human being and live in our rational self-interest, then I'm going to reference over to something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, more of the psychological work and the psychology work, that our rational self-interest is anything that'll get us up to that self-actualization. So yes, there's a lot of the searching for food and shelter and water and all that stuff. Then you have belonging, you have mastery, you have all that stuff. Working your way up to rational self-interest, and I'm sure you can find better descriptions of that somewhere else if you don't know Maslow's hierarchy of need. So, seems pretty straightforward, right? Let me bounce that off of some of the other ones. Egoism and utilitarianism has a lot of similarities on the surface. Both theories recognize that we live in a complex world. Our world is not simple, and you are very, very rarely faced with a dilemma that has one option that you can take that is completely good, everything's positive, no issues at all. Usually, in the world we live in, we are faced with a few opportunities or few options that have a spectrum of good and bad in each option. Usually every action you take will have some positive and some negative ramifications. Where they differ is that utilitarian will say we want the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So in general, as a society, whatever actions you take should have a mathematical greatest amount of good and then minimize the damage, right? Egoism is very similar, except it says that we're doing that on our personal level. We're maximizing our greatest good, what is the best for us, and minimizing the damage to us. Now, the reason she says that is because looking at the way we live, when we do that, when we're reaching our self-actualization, Well, first of all, that's the goal, right? We want to reach that self-actualization, and then by doing that, does not interfere with someone else reaching their self-actualization. So there's no downside to this. There's competition, but there's nothing immoral about competition. But it does argue against theft and things like that. But I'll get back to that. Second, comparing it to altruism. Now, altruism is the antithesis of egoism. An altruist says that I'm going to give up whatever I can to help someone else, and it's moral because I'm not benefiting from it. And egoism is the exact opposite. It's moral because I'm benefiting from it. Now, the problem with altruism, and there's plenty of articles online from egoists, and if you go onto the Ayn Rand Institute, they constantly compare altruism and egoism. But one of my favorite quotes from Ayn Rand is, the goal of the altruist is to find the ultimate way to self-destruct, right? So an altruist is going to find a way that their death or their self-destruction has the greatest impact. Think of a soldier who dies in war to save a nation. One life versus an entire nation, and we'll praise that. But they praise it because he did not benefit. Whereas an egoist would say, hey, he just made that much of an effort, that much of an investment. He put everything he had into something he believed in, into something that protects his family, into the protecting the things that he wants and loves and all that. So we will consider the soldier who dies on the front line to save his country good because he's doing something he believes in, something that'll make him happy, and he's decided that protecting himself, protecting his nation is a greater use of his life than having not done that, and then living with the ramifications, right? I mean, imagine if you had the opportunity to take out Hitler and then you didn't, and then Hitler went and did all of his things. You would feel terrible. You would never reach self-actualization that way. So living with that type of integrity is the things that we praise about it. And for the record, I am a veteran, so I'm not just speaking out of my rear end there. Okay, so egoism versus the brute. One of the common misconceptions about egoism is that we're advocating that people just do whatever they want and take whatever they want without any regard of other people. And depending on what text you read, the words that they use could suggest that. So I understand why people have this understanding, or why people have this interpretation of it, especially when Ayn Rand is adamant about taking back words, right? She's trying to steal her word back or make something cool again. She has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. She very easily could have created another word to differentiate between selfishness and what I want to call rational self-interest. But she didn't, because she wants to essentially prove a point. I'm not her, I'm not going to prove that point. So I'm going to differentiate between selfish and rational self-interest. The selfish person, she has labeled as the brute. Now, the brute is the big guy, the naturally big guy, got the big club, and he goes around, caveman style, right? Goes around and he takes from people, steals people, probably rapes people, and just whatever he wants, right? Now, a lot of people, including utilitarian or a lot of different philosophies, will say this is bad, but the reason it's bad differs. One thing we all agree on is that when a brute acts this way, eventually everyone's going to gang up on him. So in the long run, it's not beneficial anyway. So that's a utilitarian would agree with an egoist in this way. An altruist and an egoist would agree that he's harming other people and that's bad. The reason is different though. An egoist says that you're stealing, which means you're removing their rights. You're using that force upon them, which is evil, and that's bad. But the real key of it, the real major differentiation, is that psychologically you cannot reach self-actualization if all you're doing is stealing and robbing and beating and looting and all that stuff, right? You have to produce in order to do it. And she gives a metaphor. I think she gave it. Maybe it was another writer, but she gives a metaphor that if you put a brute on an island by himself, he's going to die. If you put a farmer on an island by himself, he'll find a way to start farming. Honestly, if you put like a program engineer on an island, he's probably going to figure out some way to live. That productivity, or the ability to produce, is one of the key virtues in egoism that differentiates it from the brute, and that's based in psychology, based in the way we live as humans. So back to that qua human. So the way that we live, we can only reach our max potential and our max self-actualization and our max rational self-interest when we are producing, as well as operating in a community, because we do live in communities and so forth. So that's the big difference there. So it's not just the ends don't justify the mean, or just looking at the long-term benefits versus short-term, and all those things are true, but really the integrity in which you live, and integrity is one of the other virtues of objectivism. The integrity in which you live would prevent you from being the brute, and it results itself in a lot of freedom. Egoism results in a lot of freedom, and that's where you get into the capitalist political structure. That's going to be another video that I'll be referencing this video in. Okay, and finally, the major misconception about egoism is not just the brute, but kind of tied into it, where you have subjectivism. Subjectivism means that everyone has a different perspective of an issue, and based on their perspective, what is good will change from them, right? Now, objectivism rejects this, which you wouldn't think, right? You would think that if everyone's looking for their rational self-interest, then what's good for them is a subjective thing, right? That's a reasonable rationality to break through. But the difference is there is such a thing as good. There's an objective good and evil. And objectivism is one of the few philosophies that actually recognizes or states that there's an objective good. There is good and evil in the world. Now, she labels that good and evil as what allows us to live qua man, so reaching the rational self-interest. So it's not about your perspective changing what's good. It's your perspective changes your route to how to get good, right? So if you have two people competing for, we'll say, the same job, right? It is not in your rational self-interest to cheat on a job application, because you're losing your integrity, and when you don't live with integrity, you can't reach self-actualization. Let alone once you get the job and you can't perform, and all the other utilitarian style things or long-term issue style things. But by cheating on that resume, even though you get the job, which would be the subjective good, that I did what I needed to do to get that job and that's good, you did not live qua human. You did not live in your best way, and that is why you won't reach your maximum rational self-interest. So that's kind of a sticky little change there. I may end up doing a full video just on egoism versus subjectivism. If you want that, let me know in the comments below. But okay, there's my 13-minute video now. Just a quick overview of egoism. And once again, if you want something more in depth, either let me know and I'll go into it, or go to the Ayn Rand Institute. I do not suggest any other videos at this point. If I find one, maybe I'll put it in the comments below somewhere. But as of right now, there's a lot of misinterpretations about egoism. But I'm glad this is done so that I can go forth into some more sticky situations. And I look forward to creating videos about either capitalism or political structures, or getting into actual current issues.